at the movies in association with Maxell.
On this week's show, we hail the return of the Man of Steel as X-Men director Bryan Singer adds his flavor to juice up an old franchise.
Wham!
Newcomer Brandon Routh fills one of cinema's most famous spandex suits. Kate Bosworth unblondes herself as his love interest Lois Lane.
I forgot how warm you are.
And Kevin Spacey goes bald as he tries Lex Luthor on for size.
And I want my cut.
There's no doubt about it. This is a show with the story behind the rebirth of a superhero. It's certainly been a long time coming, but Superman is at last ready to once again fly faster than a speeding bullet. And for fans young and old, excitement is rife, even taking hold of the seasoned Hollywood cast and crew on location in Australia.
People were on, movie drugs. It was like, I can't believe it's happening and isn't this exciting? And we're here for 9 months in another country creating this whole world.
Join us over the next 30 minutes as Brandon Routh admits to Superman going to his head.
I was running around the house, jumping, and ended up giving myself a migraine.
And Kevin Spacey pimps his ride.
I just had my little golf cart souped up, and it was called the Super Buster.
But first, following an agonizing, decades-long process of resurrecting the Man in Tights, he finally got off the ground thanks to X-Men 1 and 2 director Bryan Singer. Action! For Singer, a lifelong unwavering fan, altering the very essence of the superhero was never going to be an option.
There's something about Superman that has survived for 70 years. Perhaps it's because he was the first superhero, the most powerful superhero. He kind of embodies what everybody aspires to be. He could take over the world, he could be a god, but he chooses not to be. He chooses to acknowledge the human side of him. To try to shy away from those things or to contemporize or make him black or leather or something like that would be absurd. I looked at the other incarnations and ideas that had been developed over about 9 years, and I kind of stayed clear of them. I've always had my own idea of a Superman story. To me, it should have always been a return story.
5 years. If your father was alive, he never would have let you go. I almost gave up hope. I just thought I would never see you again.
I think if you're over the age of 25, you know the original Superman, or you have an idea of what it is, and if you're younger than that, you know either Smallville or you basically, the origin story is something you should reflect upon. But at the same time, by taking a nostalgic superhero, but bringing him into a kind of modern, human, romantic dilemma.
Well, you're back, and everyone seems to be pretty happy about it.
Not everyone.
One that even the Man of Steel can't overcome. That, to me, was a very exciting prospect.
An exciting prospect, perhaps, but it would mean turning his back on the third installment of X-Men.
I felt heartbroken because I love the X-Men universe. And if I could have split myself into two people, I would have done.
Splitting into two people was something Singer would leave to his leading man, his untested leading man.
It had to be an unknown, because if it was some famous actor, it would be such and such as Superman. But Superman is much larger than that. So when he steps out on the screen, he has to look like Superman. And unlike Spider-Man and Batman, he doesn't wear a mask. This is it. This is what you get.
Enter 26-year-old chiseled Iowa native Brandon Routh, whose powerful connection to Superman traces back to his early childhood.
My first experience with Superman was I saw it on television when I was 5 or 6, and I was really excited to see the movie. I had my Superman pajamas, and I was running around the house, jumping, and ended up giving myself a migraine. I actually did have a migraine the morning that I was called by my agent to tell me that I was supposed to be meeting with Bryan. I thought it was quite odd that the migraines, kind of bookended the experience.
I met with him at this coffee shop on Sunset Boulevard, and I walked in and got us some coffee, and I said, "Hey, you want to go outside?" And he stood up, and I was like, "Oh, well, he has the presence." And over talking to him for a couple of hours, I observed aspects of his nature, of his own personal character that I knew would translate to this character.
It's not easy for me to live my life being who I am, keeping secrets.
And as for Superman's arch-enemy Lex Luthor, Singer had always seen him in Academy Award-winning actor Kevin Spacey, whom he directed in 1995's The Usual Suspects.
Because of my relationship with him from making The Usual Suspects, he was always on my mind.
This is kind of a little reunion, isn't it? Heck, I'm a fan.
That was a good thing because in developing the script, it enabled us to explore moments that I knew that Kevin could pull off.
Tell me everything.
He combines that delicate balance of humor and sadism.
Bring it on!
That Lex Luthor needs to have, and he looks very cool with a shaved head.
You're bald.
Cute kid. I had such a remarkable experience working with Brian 10 years ago on Usual Suspects, and when he decided to take over this franchise, he called and said, I'd love for you to consider playing Lex Luthor. It was an easy slam dunk answer for me. Action! I have always believed that I'm a better actor when I have a great director than when I realize I don't have a director and I have to save my own ass. He's one of the finest directors I've ever worked with, and I owe probably my film career to him.
Meanwhile, for actresses Kate Bosworth and Parker Posey, who played Lois Lane and Kitty Kowalski respectively, there was also plenty of drama to sink their teeth into before even seeing a script.
Open this door!
There was interest in me for the part, and I said, well, I'd like to read the script. And then they said, well, you have to say yes before you read it. And then they flew someone from Australia to New York to deliver the script to have me read it in a cafe somewhere, and they waited outside for a couple of hours. So there was already this drama around it.
I was cast and then I was allowed to read the script, and I suppose at that point I could have said that I wasn't interested, but the script was so fantastic, and then just having Brian execute it was so exciting.
And so, with a fantastic script and Bryan Singer at the helm, the Superman story takes flight.
The film's conceit is that it begins 5 years after the original Part 2. The idea is that Superman has gone away and that Lex Luthor has been in prison. And then they both come back.
Superman returns, and I don't think he really realized at the time of leaving that things would change so much. He didn't quite know how to say goodbye to Lois, so he doesn't.
How could you leave us like that? I moved on. So did the rest of us. He comes back to work at the Daily Planet, where Lois Lane is still working. Hark, hey, welcome back.
Lois Lane has written an article called Why the World Doesn't Need Superman.
She's felt hurt and abandoned and angry about Superman leaving and not explaining why. Those emotions are what Superman and Lois have to deal with. Where'd you go?
To Krypton?
But you told me it was destroyed ages ago.
It was. One of the great things we get to see is Superman learning about human emotion. Some things you can't really understand until you go through them, and learning about love is one of those things.
Well, you've been gone. Fearless reporter Lois Lane is a mommy. But if you ask me, she's still in love with you-know-who.
But there's another L word Superman is forced to contend with, and he's up to no good.
In Lex's case, it seems that he's still about what he was always about, which is property and land and being a capitalist.
I'll have advanced technology. Thousands of years beyond what anyone could throw at me.
And just, as he says in the movie, just wanting his cut.
Lex is, planning to rule the world.
But millions of people will die.
Billions! He always seems to surround himself with people who aren't quite good at what they do. People that are just, not quite getting it.
Do you know the story of Prometheus? No, of course you don't. Prometheus was a god who stole the power of fire from the other gods and gave control of it to mortals. I just want what Prometheus wanted.
Sounds great, Lex, but you're not a god.
He does have a rather bizarre relationship with Kitty.
Gods are selfish beings who fly around in little red capes and don't share their power with mankind.
I suppose there's love between the two of them, although I think Parker's character has a more difficult time reconciling who the Lex is versus the Lex she thought he was.
She's in love with a man who has no love to give at all. This is like the biggest egomaniac criminal.
I don't want to be a god. I just want to bring fire to the people.
And I want my cut.
For Brandon Routh, convincingly portraying the separate identities of Clark Kent and Superman went beyond simply donning a pair of black-rimmed glasses.
There are two different demands on what's needed. You know, when he's needed to be the hero, he plays Superman. When he's finding out information, he's Clark.
So with the super hearing, does he hear each sound by itself or everything all at once?
Both.
The way Superman moves is the way he feels. You know, he must move strong and confident with a lot of presence and grace because he has all this power. And then you have the complete opposite of that, which is Clark. Which you just throw all that out the door and the voice is a little bit higher. Hello. He's just really excited. Clark is just pure joy and kind of excitement about seeing Lois, and that's where his goofiness and awkwardness comes out.
I felt that I was actually speaking to two different people without it being obvious. My favorite thing about Brandon's performance was that it was such a quiet transition. It was so subtle.
But subtlety was a completely foreign concept to Kevin Spacey, who took method acting to new extremes.
He had a golf cart that he painted with all these decals.
I just had my little golf cart souped up, and it had kryptonite stripes on the side and a little Superman logo on the front with an X through it, and it was called the Super Buster.
And then he went by my office and picked me up in it, and then we drove it to set and was screaming from a megaphone,
Superman must die.
Kill Superman, kill Superman.
Superman must die.
And instead of just driving up to the stage, we drove right on the stage, right through the chairs, right down to the set, and everyone was like, whoa!
And we had a Superman doll tied to a chain that I dragged around all over the studio lot until it was nothing but a fluff of cotton.
So long, Superman.
Brian was so determined to have a Lex Luthor that was a real nemesis to Superman and a real struggle for him to fight against. He wanted it to be meaner and tougher and bitter and vicious.
Come on, let me hear you say it just once.
You're insane.
No!
So that at times when Superman is at his most vulnerable, the audience actually thinks that Lex Luthor might win.
Superman will run!
Almost.
That's it for part one, but don't move, because coming up in part two, the harsh truths behind Superman's suit are laid bare.
The man will always look like he's on his way to a costume party. And that's a tradition in history that you have to face head on.
And the health hazards of superhero idolization are uncovered.
He was in constant pain, our director.
He certainly brings some hardships on himself.
MTV at the Movies, in association with Maxell.
Welcome back to this MTV Making the Movie, Superman Returns. Coming up, Brandon Routh reveals that saving the world is a lonely affair.
I shot green screen for at least 4 months. It's just me hanging from the wire for many, many hours.
And the cast warn against the perils of superhero worship.
He was in constant pain, our director.
He certainly brings some hardships on himself.
But first, having found his Man of Steel in newcomer Brandon Routh, director Bryan Singer turned his attention to the all-important suit. Aware that the 70s style blue tights and red underwear would be a tricky look to pull off, he insisted they stay on nonetheless.
Superman is the Man of Steel. You know, bullets bounce off him, not his suit. And that's a tradition in history that you have to face head on. The man will always look like he's on his way to a costume party. And it's just how he plays it. You know, if he takes himself seriously. Remember, Clark Kent is his disguise. He doesn't dress up as Superman. He's comfortable as Superman. He's majestic. He dresses up as Clark Kent. Puts the glasses on, puts on a little awkwardness. So you can't run away from that.
I'm very pleased that Brian chose to keep the suit classic.
The 70s underwear that Superman wears, it's so cute.
I never once felt funny because I was wearing tights.
Oh, it's so cute.
It was always a very proud moment for me.
It takes a big man to, like, pull that off.
It was very top secret because the press hadn't seen Brandon in the suit yet, so it was kind of surrounded by, very much like this actually, black kind of veils all over the place, and it felt all very confidential and very serious.
I think the biggest moment it hit me was, I remember going into one of the stages around the hallway outside his dressing room, and he stepped out into kind of a dingy hall, and it was just the two of us standing there. And I was like, and I just started laughing. I mean, I was smiling, you're Superman. I mean, this is weird. And he goes, I know. I
arrived on the set, and he came walking down the stairs, and I was like, well, it's Superman. I mean, there's no question that's Superman.
And that was the moment I was like, we're gonna be fine. And I just turned around and said, great, look forward to seeing you suit up tomorrow.
But Singer also knew that the suit would mean nothing unless he got audiences to believe a man can fly.
Every day were conversations about the physics of Superman. Break it off its thing and then push it up. What is heavy? What is difficult?
It's a lot of up, but it's not like a throw.
What is effortless?
And then when it finally comes away, it's just perfect. That's exactly it.
One of the interesting things we did is he did movement training in a swimming pool.
We actually filmed some footage of me swimming, doing flip turns and stopping midair.
Ready, and action.
What he was able to do is kick off from one side of the pool and then move his body in certain ways, basically in flight. And then, so then when he was up in the cables and the rigs, which are somewhat painful and awkward, he could remember those training moments and actually apply them in the flying sequences.
I told her I'm a frequent flyer, there's nothing to worry about. And then also I think that footage was kind of taken into account with the CGI elements. The animators saw that to get an idea of how I moved.
Action!
I shot green screen for at least 4 months. And it's just me, I mean, there's crew members and everything, but it's just me hanging from the wire for many, many hours.
Camera, 3, 2, 1, drop!
And not working with any other actors. I'm working with inanimate objects, plane wings, green boards, all kinds of things. So it's a very lonely proposition playing that character for that long. So I'm eager to work with actors very soon.
Obviously, there was a lot of physicality in this film. It was a lot of work for everyone involved.
Warning, warning.
You do start feeling like a stunt person after a while when you're doing that, and that was a challenge for me personally.
3, 2, 1, go!
But however taxing the challenges were for cast and crew, they simply paled in comparison to Bryan Singer's. After all, returning Superman to the silver screen after a 19-year absence would make any director sweat bullets.
One day you think, oh, this is all gonna work out great, and the next day you think, oh my God, what have I done? I've never yet been able to get to a place where I just feel utterly confident. And I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy. I think, mentally and physically it's unhealthy, but, it's just a process. It's an up and down process. And yet I balance that with moments where I stop and I say, wow, I'm directing my favorite superhero.
Wham! Into the ground. And then
I remind myself of that too, to ease up the bad times.
I don't think the truck, we just have to be wary of the truck because of it blocking him. I don't want to lose him.
He certainly brings some hardships on himself.
That was what's great about Brandon. Brandon never worried about it. Even after he saw the movie the other day finished, he was just like, yeah, I never doubted for a minute. And I'm like, really? I doubted every morning I woke up.
He was in constant pain, our director.
There's no question that Bryan is somebody who's so absolutely obsessed and concerned with doing it right and with honoring it.
He's crazy.
It's crystals, magical crystals.
It was like he would throw marbles on the floor, so people would start whoa. He was constantly being creative, which is kind of unusual in a movie that cost $200 million.
Action!
It was wild. I love him.
Bryan is not about angst and anxiety without solutions. And that's what you always see Bryan doing in a corner, is he's sitting with the writers and he's sitting with the editor and they're watching something and he's saying, yeah, but what if we do, yeah, but I don't see it that way. Bryan has a visionary cinematic brain.
That's how I'm seeing it in my head, which could ultimately change.
I sometimes think he's already cut the whole movie in his head and he's trying to get you to do the things he needs you to do in order for it to work out that way.
Boom, and then I'll be with Brand, I'll be cutting a lot.
Quite frankly, I think he's making a bigger deal out of the idea that he doesn't have a good time. We had a blast on the film. There's an enormous amount of laughter going on.
And so, what remains after the blood, sweat, and laughter is the fact that Bryan Singer has pulled off one of the biggest films of 2006, having successfully married smart storytelling with superpowered characters. All bets are on that instant global superstardom and a sequel await.
I knew full well going in that it was going to be a well-rounded experience and that it was going to be a pretty big deal when this film came out. I don't know quite what to expect because I can't quite imagine everything that's going to happen, but I'll take it on with an open mind and a smile on my face as best as I can.
Look, in the sky, Chief.
It's a bird.
It's a plane.
No, look, it's... you wanted to see me?
I've been very excited for this film to come out for so many months, and I'm very proud of it, and I think Bryan is very proud of it as well, and so I think that there's a very, very great chance that the studio will allow us to do another one.
We're talking about it now. It was a very busy 2 years for me, and I'm going to take a somewhat brief vacation and actually figure out what I'm doing next. But we're talking about that. I certainly have ideas for it, and I wouldn't be opposed to it.
MTV at the Movies, in association with Maxell.